Hi listeners, this is a recording of our Speculative Futures Stockholm Clubhouse event on the 7th of April 2021. Keep listening for intriguing conversations about methods and approaches to explore possible futures. Welcome everyone. So before we are introducing the event, I would like to start with actually introducing the Speculative Futures Initiative. I know we have returning members, but we also have new members coming and listening in. And it's always nice to just have a fresh take on what it is that we do and what are we doing. So the Speculative Futures Initiative, I know that you might have seen Stockholm, this is us, but perhaps you've also seen other cities like Speculative Futures Berlin, Milan, and actually there are chapters all over the world in each continent as well. So what is this Speculative Futures? So we are actually a bunch of really passionate people about creating a space where people can come to discuss about future challenges and opportunities, because what we want to is to envision, design and build and implement different alternative, better futures. It's because we are facing problems in our society, and often these problems, they are answered with short-term solutions, but we believe it's really important to use future thinking and strategy to really approach different perspectives on how we can create other futures. And one of the goals is not to only have one type of person in these discussions, but actually our goal is to create a very interdisciplinary platform for people, for not only designers, but all people from the industry, businesses, healthcare workers, politicians, researchers, science fiction writers, young students, activists, to really create a space where we can come together. And I remember our last event that we still had in person. We invited Dan Hill, head of Vinnova, to come to talk about how he envisions a different city. And he came and he was the keynote speaker of the evening, and he shared, for example, that cities shouldn't be a place for technologies and tech companies to apply their creations on our society, but rather cities should be designed to nurture social interactions and where cultures come together and can meet, because that is what he believed the foundation of society. And I remember this talk was so inspiring and so many people had questions, and it was such a good discussion, and I had to stop the session, otherwise we would have gone until midnight. But it is really about creating a space where people who are interested in caring about the future can come together and learn also speculative design methods and forecasting as well. So you can go back to your job as well and start thinking about it and perhaps also applying it. So in our events, we'll be hosting, of course, speakers, practitioners, students to talk about different topics. But we'll also have workshops where you can learn and share your own perspective as well. So with that said, you can find the Speculative Futures Initiative, especially ours as well, the Stockholm, on Twitter, LinkedIn and Meetup. And if you sign up on Meetup, for example, you get a notification on all our future events as well. So if you would like to get in touch and be part of this, follow us, then those are the places. All right, with that said, I would like to give the word to you, Viraj, to present this event.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, and welcome everyone. It's really nice of you to join us for this evening. For this particular event, we thought it would be nice to look inwards. In terms of the subject matter of futures. So if you consider the different ways in which we look at futures, or different sort of defined ways of looking at futures, so whether it's science fiction stories or speculative design or design futures, these are all words that we hear thrown around all the time. And very often, because it sounds like technical jargon, it sounds like technical words, we sort of create a distance towards it, and it sounds exclusive, and honestly we quite hate that, especially at Speculative Futures. We want it to be such that everyone can access it, and we want it to be such that everyone can like it, because it's just words at the end of the day, and everyone should be able to use them. And when you know those words, it works in a way that you sort of get a perspective on looking at the world and looking at the future. So that's how we are looking inwards from a subject matter perspective. But we are also looking inwards within the team, because everyone that you will hear talking today are people who are a part of the Speculative Futures community in Stockholm. So what we've done for the last 2 months or so is that we've researched a few topics, and we've been having these meetings every 2 or 3 weeks or so. And we've been having these fantastic discussions about what it means to know speculative design, what it means to define design futures, and so on. But it's not to define them in terms of quote-unquote definitive definitions. It's just so that we know, we have more of a discussion and we know how to look at the future. And these discussions were so interesting that we thought, well, you know what, this should be an event, and we should make an event out of it and let everyone know what we've been researching about for the last 2 months or so. Who we have here today is Daniele Tatasciore. He works with technology and design in and for an agency called Another Tomorrow in Stockholm. We have Jonas Boutani Werner. He runs fantastic studios boosting organizations and their abilities for innovation, organization, development, and strategic learning. We have Louise Juul Søndergaard, who is an interaction designer and researcher exploring critical feminist design of intimate technologies. We have Lequay, who in his words is a thorny multidisciplinary designer and researcher exploring eco-responsible and socially desirable futures. We have Victoria Cleverby, who is a UX researcher and service designer with a special interest in strategic foresight. And your hosts for the day are Trieuvy, that you just heard before me. Trieuvy Lou is an interaction designer and future thinker, experienced in human-centered design and speculative design. And lastly, you've got me. My name is Viraj Joshi, and I'm a designer and technologist. I currently work at Fjord Stockholm, and I produce speculative artifacts and science fiction in my free time.
Thank you so much, Viraj. In this first session here, I'm going to invite both Paul and Victoria. And Victoria is going to share with us all about weak signals. And Paul, you are going to talk about design futures. And then we are going to have some discussions about how they relate to each other. So much looking forward. So, Victoria, hi. Welcome. We had great discussions and you had great examples in our talks before. Could you share today with all the listeners? Some might have heard this term for the first time. Maybe others already know about weak signals. What are they?
I would say that weak signals are the first indications of a possibly emerging trend, a kind of first expression of change, where the impact of it could change the course of events in a different direction. So, for example, if we look back in time, maybe we could see that video stores where you could rent VHS videos, if you remember those, were a weak signal for Netflix. The idea that we today don't own movies, but rather watch them through subscription or rental models. And what I find very interesting with weak signals is their kind of philosophical complexity. This is the concept of weak signals seems to be everything and anything that is related to substantial potential change. Then anything could be a potential weak signal. So does that mean that everything is a weak signal? Maybe. I don't know, to be honest, but it sparks my philosophical interest. But aside from these philosophical concerns, weak signals are very useful because they can be used in different ways. For example, weak signals can be understood as part of an evolution. What might start as a weak signal might develop into a strong signal that then might develop into a trend. This is not, however, sure. Weak signals could just be a weak signal that never develops into something else. You could also see the interrelation of weak signals and trends in the way that weak signals point towards trends instead of being part of trends. And the third way of understanding it is that several weak signals could be combined when crafting scenarios. And scenarios are a tool used in many kind of future-oriented techniques. Does that give you a suggestion of what weak signals could be, Trieuvy?
Yes, that was excellent. Actually, this is the first time I heard about the example with the VCRs, and I imagine I was still very small when I went to the store, when my dad took me there. And if you would tell me that in the future I didn't have to go there anymore to the store, but I could have everything on demand, wow. So would you say that, so weak signals, how would they be difficult to notice and observe them right now, or like really complex, or how do you see that?
No, I don't think they're hiding in plain sight, basically.
Ah, yes. Interesting. Thank you, Victoria. And now I would like to also invite Paul to the discussion. And we're going to jump spectrum here. This is going to be really fun. Paul, you've been researching design futures.
So, yes, design futures. And I think to give it in a very simple sentence, design futures is the application of design thinking in a future thinking framework. It's quite hard to pinpoint because it's kind of at the crossroad of many different type of fields: design, strategy, speculative design, and future thinking. But one thing which is very important to talk about is that design future is always grounding itself in data-driven research, in scientific facts or information that actually can be confirmed and observed today, and that are known to have an influence on today's life, but also on long-term perspectives. Another aspect of it is that it's very multidisciplinary. In order to shape design futures, projects are shaped around different type of capabilities, by including inviting data scientists, economists, ethnographers, and digital artists, for example. And that gives the richness to the representation of an alternative future. So, for example, the Meatless Future is a project that I really like. It's actually a video and physical installation that were created by different individuals, and they represent and show potential future scenarios about a meat consumption-free world in 2050. And the people who created that saw and created this installation as a platform for conversation by creating physical and digital experiences, which in a way could propose this different alternative future, but also sparkle debate. So what they've done, for example, for each of the scenarios, they presented analysis of carbon footprint, of the different impact of each of the scenarios, and, for instance, created newspapers from the future with data evidences in order to kind of immerse the public and immerse the participant into these different scenarios and give them more ways to grasp what are the consequences and how they could actually live within that future. So I think the goals of these futures are primarily to engage an audience into experiencing a potential and yet more importantly desirable future. It's about increasing awareness of people on contemporary challenges, but as I mentioned before, it's really about inspiring people to act and promote collective debate. So one I think global takeaway you could think of when you think of design future is that it's really about restoring optimistic and participated views of the future. We've seen companies for a while who've been trying to use this tool, but now public institutions also start to grasp the impact and promote its usage internally, because they believe that design future practice and tools and methodologies are more adapted to tackle, but also to unravel in some ways wicked challenges that we face today and propose alternative futures.
Excellent. I think what is really interesting is because we have a spectrum here, right? We have Victoria here, you shared us about hidden plain weak signals, hidden in plain, and then Paul, you talked about, for example, design futures, and you also mentioned that it could also be used as a tool in cooperation as well. So, and I would like to ask Victoria now, how are design futures and weak signals connected? What is your perspective?
Yeah, I recall a model I've seen of design future presenting it as a design thinking process, and in the step 2, after empathizing with the situation, you open up to scan. And I think in this part, collecting weak signals can be really beneficial for seeing what is happening around you. It's a kind of opening up really broadly. I also think that if you're going to work with scenarios as part of design futures, weak signals can be really, really good input into crafting those.
Excellent. And Paul, then I would like to ask you also the opposite question. Can you actually create design futures without at all listening to weak signals? Is that possible, in your opinion?
Well, I would say no, and I would actually join the opinion of Victoria, saying that since weak signals are indicators of, that the change is underway, you actually need them to give richness, but how can I say, meat around the backbone of the future you imagine. So you have a direction you believe is actually following some trends, but weak signals are actually kind of giving you a little bit more details of how might these different futures might evolve. So I think it's unrealistic to deny them or just not acknowledge them, and in some ways maybe prevent to propose unrealistic futures, because that would be ignoring what changes might be underway today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paul and Victoria. Moving to the next session, I would like to invite Viraj to moderate that one. Viraj.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I'll be hosting the next round, and the next round is going to be done with Daniele, who will speak about critical design, and Louise, who is going to be speaking about speculative design. So starting with you, Daniele, can you tell us a little bit about what is critical design? What are we critiquing, really?
Critical design is a design that tries to be contemporary and trying to make statement about contemporary living. And because in its definition there is the word design, it makes it also commercial. But as we know, critical and design might be a definition that might be paradoxical, because design isn't usually critical. But in the critical, in this form, it's more seen as an art action, art that can be infused in the piece that the designer wants to do by using critical design, and the design part then can be seen as a basis by using a consumer piece that can be then be the basis of the critique. One example I found recently about critical design was a car. It was called car mirror, and it's simply just a mirror placed in cities, and as big as 5 meters times 4. And it was made by this Spanish artist called Martin Giggs, and it's called car mirror because allows the people that have a car to look themselves inside the mirror, and they want to incorporate the car as a personal object of ourselves. And this is something that makes the people think about a contemporary thing that is incorporated inside ourselves.
Fantastic. That sounds very purposeful to me. Now I'm going to ask you, Louise, what do you think about speculative design? Do you see any relations?
Yes, definitely. I see a lot of relations between critical design, as Daniele just talked about, and speculative design. I think the most important is that these two practices are often in opposition or more like an alternative to more commercial design practices. So they try to sort of not necessarily following trends in society, but really critiquing how we're living today, particularly like the problems of that kind of living, and then speculate on alternative futures. So speculative design, it is something that is especially have been practiced by people within the academy or at the university. Specifically, it came from Anthony Don and Fiona Raby, was some quite important people to to advocate for that practice, but also more like artistic approaches to design. So the focus is really to try to speculate on different possible futures. So not only the futures that may happen if we continue as we live today, but really opening up to imagine radically different futures, and thereby sort of start a discussion about what kind of future we want to live in. And these can be both utopian futures or dystopian futures, but really as a way to understand and talk about what kind of future do we want.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It makes me think, though, why speculate and why critique? Would either of you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think I think what's really important here is sort of like try to think long term, because sometimes design can have like a very nearsighted, solutionist approach to the world, where we might just like try to figure out how to live by the day of tomorrow, right? But here it's really taking this long-term perspective on human living, also on like planetary scale. How do we imagine the future of our world, our planet, our society? Because there's these huge global problems, right? And a simple solution cannot fix that. So that's where speculative design and critical design really opens up.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of questioning happening in speculative design and also in critical design. Are these the parallels that you saw as well, Daniele, or do you think there's any other parallels that we may have missed in our discussion?
I agree with Marie, and also knowing that Donald Raby also has I've done many contributions to critical design as well. To add something about critical is that there is always this underlining importance of being ironical and introduce the humor as important aspect to validate a critical design, because only by adding humor while you seeing a piece, you give the person to think about their everyday consumption and everyday tools that they use, and then they can be seen in another face, in another way. So that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, that's very interesting. To me, it sounds like speculative design is asking why not? Like, why not think about all these alternative narratives? Whereas critical design is asking about why. Why are we doing things in the way we are doing? By, like you said, being ironical or comical about it. Now we are going to move on to our third round, which is going to be moderated by Trieuvy again. So back to you, Trieuvy.
Thank you, Viraj. I'm especially excited for this one because I always found the difference so hard. So first of all, Jonas, join me on the stage. Could you, I know you've been researching sci-fi. I would love to hear what your definition is. What is sci-fi? But also like what for you makes a really good sci-fi that you really enjoy?
Okay, so definition... well, just like the other topics, science fiction could be a method or a lens that helps you focus on the future. One thing that, like one orthodox and strict definition of sci-fi is to base fiction on a technological what if. So, what if there was time travel, or what if there was robots, or what if we had an AI singularity, or what if there was a moon base, or superhumans, or alien life, or an alien invasion, or whatever, right? So you start with a technological what if, so you base fiction on that. So that would be the orthodox definition of what sci-fi is. And by that definition, it's also funny to note that Star Trek is science fiction, and Star Wars is a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, with the central differentiator being metaphysical, the Force, rather than technological innovation. So by that definition, Star Wars is not science fiction.
Wow, all right. I think that is such a wonderful example about how you suddenly include technology. Thank you for sharing that. Would you like to share with our listeners another example that you really enjoy?
What I really like about science fiction is not maybe the look and feel of it, because it differs so much. But the thing that I really enjoy is when it starts being about politics and morals and about our society and putting things into perspectives.
When you read and then you stop because it's getting a bit too much, you're like, oh my god, this is getting serious. Like how technology can affect our behavior. Yes,
My favorite example, I have to mention Rendezvous with Rama, which is this book that I got it as a gift from my neighbors who are total sci-fi buffs. And it's about basically it's a spoiler alert here, but for people who haven't read it, and but the story is about a comet or something that is approaching the Earth and starts slowing down, and it's a kind of it turns out to be like a space egg. It's someone sending life to other planets, and that opens up for so many questions. It really blew my mind when I read it.
Amazing.
Awesome book.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that example. I'm definitely going to check that out as well. And all right, I would like to also invite Viraj. We're going to jump a little bit from sci-fi now to design fiction, and we'll connect them back later. Viraj, join me. And what is design fiction? I think a lot of us uses the term, but maybe we always don't use it correctly. Could you share your definition of design fiction?
Yeah, that's something that was also difficult to define from a perspective of, well, what is it exactly? Because you can design so many different things, and stories are also designed in a certain way. But the clear definition actually came to me when I was thinking of it in comparison with sci-fi, which is why this particular mode of talking about it is so valuable. And the thing is, sci-fi is a story, right? So sci-fi is always a narrative. It has a beginning, a middle, and end, or at least it takes you from one particular point of time in the story to another. So it's a narrative. Whereas design fiction is always something that is designed, which means it's not a narrative. It's not about characters, but design fiction is about objects. It's about interactions. It's about artifacts and different sort of MacGuffins that are used inside of sci-fi. So, for example, Star Trek, as Jonas pointed out, is sci-fi. But then in the first Star Trek shows, they had something called the communicator, which was this clamshell device that opened up and you could speak into. This was in the 1960s. And lo and behold, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, we had clamshell phones. So that communicator itself is an example of design fiction. So design fiction is an output essentially that has to be designed. So whether it's an interaction, whether it's a map designed of the solar system inside of Star Trek, where they have like an alpha quadrant and a beta quadrant and a gamma quadrant between which they fly. So that artifact which has been designed is called design fiction. Design fiction is essentially one artifact, therefore it doesn't take you through a story, but that artifact can invoke you to think about different things. So for example, and you may remember this, Trieuvy, last year when, right before COVID, when things were normal and going to exhibitions was not a wild idea, we went to this exhibition which was about fiction around Mars, and we saw a passport done for a Martian rock. So the passport is essentially, obviously an object, but giving a passport to the rock saying that the rock belongs to Mars, that object makes you think about the story of it. So the object invokes the story. So it's all about the object and the artifact inside of design fiction.
That's a wonderful example, Viraj. Yes, I remember seeing that passport, and I was standing there for 10 minutes just reflecting about, like, if this rock can have a passport, what does our passport means for us? So thank you for sharing that. I would really like to actually merge those two together and actually talk about design fiction and science fiction together. So asking you first, Viraj, science fiction, is something you can read in books or watch in movies, but like Jonas said, it's not part of everyday life yet. it's not like you're living inside a science fiction right now, right? That makes it a science fiction. But then you also say that design fiction is something that is an artifact that shows you how it actually impacts our life. So the question now is, would you say that design fiction brings science fiction actually to our reality? So does design fiction bring science fiction in our lives?
That's such a fantastic question, honestly, because when you write sci-fi or when you consume sci-fi, the thing that makes it believable is how detailed all their artifacts are, right? Like how detailed is their world, how detailed are the things that they use, how detailed is the speed that it took them to go from, say, the Earth to Moon. If they do it in like half a second, then you're going to think that, well, that's obviously fantasy. But if they show a long, excruciating film spanning 8 hours of going to the moon, then you're going to be like, well, that's realistic, isn't it? So I guess the more realistic you make it in terms of detailing out the world through the artifacts, then it starts seeming real. And that's where I think design fiction plays a role, that it details out the world. And detailing out a sci-fi world is not done only through story, it's done through all these wonderful artifacts and environments and interactions that happen inside of science fiction.
Thank you, Viraj. And also, Jonas, question to you then. I'm going to reverse the question again. I would like to know your take. Do you think that you can build one without the other? For example, can you create sci-fi without actually looking at design fiction at all?
No, that's impossible. And but what would that mean? I'm not really sure. I think it could be. What would that mean? That would mean to have a sci-fi. I mean, according to the like, if we're going to stick to this definition, this hardcore orthodox definition, that it starts with a scientific what if, like what if we had space travel? So already there, we have introduced a design fiction, right? Something that doesn't exist. And that we've introduced that, and we take those things and we combine them into a design future, and then we tell a story in that design future. But design fiction is rarely in text, and science fiction has a history of coming from text, or like it started out with books, right? Or I mean, you can discuss that too, I suppose. But the way I view it, and the way I view the relationship between the two, is that design fiction is the process of building, or a kid building a laser gun, and science fiction is the playing and the exploring of the world that gun creates, right? Like Calvin and Hobbes, or something like that. Is that good enough, Tree?
That was an excellent answer. It inspires me a lot also to think about, like they are actually quite related as well, very close. And I really like that you, for example, said like in the beginning you used to read sci-fi in books, and that makes me really think, like if you sketch it out so clearly in movies, like if it's really designed in movies like in Star Trek, is it still really fiction? One would like to ask Viraj, what do you think is very specific for sci-fi that actually design fiction lacks a little bit?
I would say bringing in the person's perspective, or a human perspective, or a living perspective, as it were, because it is an object. At the end of the day, it's very objective. It is what it is. It doesn't have potential to be any more, and therefore you have to look at it and then think about it and imagine a future. Therefore, it has a lot of responsibility on itself to convince you of this massive narrative. So that's one thing I think designers have to think of while coming up with design fiction, that am I actually capturing the narrative that I want to?
Lovely. I'm sorry, Vera, I have to talk to you directly about this. This is so great. So we actually go from design thinking to human-centered design here.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, it also works both ways, doesn't it? Because if you because it is an object and it's super detailed, and like that passport for Mars, for example, if someone's coming from Mars, and if I have a passport for Mars, that itself evokes such a fantastic story. But then again, if it was something that's completely unrelatable as an object, then invoking that story, provoking that story is so difficult.
Thank you both. I'm gonna end session 3. Thank you so much. I think this was such an interesting discussion.
So firstly, thank you so very much to all our speakers for preparing for tonight and putting in their efforts and bringing in such fantastic examples. So all of you have been fantastic. I enjoyed going through the session and listening quite a lot. So thanks so much. Secondly, follow us on social media. Speculative Futures Stockholm is available on Twitter. If you just look that up, if you just look up Speculative Futures Stockholm, you can find it on Twitter, you can find it on Meetup, and you can find it on LinkedIn as well, so you can stay in touch with us. And thirdly, we are also stopping the recording now, so we will make this available at a later date once we know how we are putting it out. And with that said, what we're going to do now is open it up to the audiences. So if anyone wants to talk to us, please raise your hands and we'll invite you onto the stage.